Welcome to Myth Madness. Last episode, I covered the myths of Jamshid. He is an important king in Persian mythology, who through his own hubris loses the blessing of the god Ormazd. When we left Jamshid, his hold on the world throne was growing weak, and his empire was full of plots and rebellions. But to find out what happens next, we have to first hear about another important character named Zahhak. In this episode, I'll cover the Shahnameh's version of the Zahhak story, and what the earlier Zoroastrian literature says about him as well. According to the Shahnameh, in the land of the Arabs there lived a good, devout, and magnificent king named Murdas. He was fabulously wealthy, with herds of 1,000 cows, 1,000 horses, 1,000 goats, and 1,000 sheep. Murdas was also a man of great generosity. His cows and goats were milked daily, and their milk was freely given to any of his subjects who asked for it. But this great king had a son who was very different from his father. The young man's name was Zahhak, and he was brave and ambitious, but also needlessly cruel and arrogant. He was also known as Bivarasp, a Persian word meaning 10,000 horses. Zahhak was called this because he owned his own herd of 10,000 horses, each dressed in a golden bridle. Zahhak doted on these horses. Even though he was a royal prince, he didn't spend his days doing anything useful. Instead, Zahhak rode the horses around to show off his great wealth and power. Zahhak is a piece of work. Naturally, that makes him an excellent candidate for being the evil spirit Ahriman's latest agent for ruining the world. One morning, Ahriman took on a disguise and appeared to Zahhak. The prince was charmed by his friendliness and debonair manner, and Ahriman eventually shared that he had a secret. But before he would share it, Ahriman made Zahhak promise not to tell anyone what he was told, and to follow his advice without question. Zahhak foolishly made this promise, and Ahriman told him that his father was old and tired, and asked the prince why a man like that had ruled for so long. Ahriman told Zahhak that he should take his father's place, since his strength and youth made him a better fit for the position. What's more, Ahriman told him that if Zahhak listened to his advice, he would become the ruler of the whole world. Zahhak listened keenly to what the stranger had to say, but the thought of killing his father deeply disturbed him. He told the stranger he couldn't. No, he wouldn't do this, and asked the stranger to give him a different piece of advice that he could follow instead. Not so fast, Ahriman told him. Zahhak made a promise, and if he broke the promise, he would stay wretched and powerless and under the thumb of his father for the rest of his life. So Zahhak agreed to follow Ahriman's advice. But when he asked the evil spirit how he was supposed to depose his father, Ahriman said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." As it happened, old King Murdas owned a fruit orchard. Every morning, before the sun rose, Murdas went there to bathe and pray while it was still dark. Ahriman sneaked into the orchard before Murdas arrived, and dug a deep pit. When the king made his way through the orchard, he fell into the pit, and broke his neck. As he lay at the bottom, his life slowly slipping away, Ahriman looked down at the king. He shoveled dirt over the king's body, filled in the pit, and disappeared. With Murdas out of the way, Zahhak was now king. But Ahriman's plans were just getting started. A little time passed, and he appeared in a new disguise, this time as a cook. Zahhak welcomed the new cook and put him in charge of the royal kitchens. According to the Shahnameh, in those ancient days, many of the dishes we eat today were not known, and very few were made from meat. Ahriman made a new innovation in the art of cooking. To build up Zahhak's strength, he made all sorts of delicious dishes from the flesh of birds and animals. First, Ahriman made a dish out of egg yolk and served it to the king. Zahhak gobbled it up, congratulated his cook, and rewarded him. There were more dishes to follow. The next day, Ahriman made a dish of roasted partridge and pheasant. On the third day, he made chicken and lamb kebab. On the fourth day, he roasted veal in saffron rosewater and wine. By then, Zahhak was so impressed with his new cook, he told him to think about what he desired most, and Zahhak would grant it to him. Ahriman told him he had one request, that the king would allow him to enter the royal presence, come forward, and kiss his shoulders. Weird ask, but Zahhak granted it. The cook came forward and kissed the king's shoulders. And then he vanished. No one had ever seen anything like that happen, nor had anyone seen anything like what was to happen next. From the 2 spots on the king's shoulders the cook had kissed, a black snake grew. Zahhak was terrified, and quickly tried to cut them off, but every time he did, the snakes grew back, hissing dangerously and darting around his head. To solve this problem, Zahhak summoned wise men and doctors from far and wide. They gathered at his court, and each tried to give a remedy for the king's condition, but no cure was found. In the midst of these men, Ahriman appeared once again. This time, the evil spirit took on the shape of a wise doctor. This new doctor had a very different prescription than the ones that came before him. He told Zahhak that it was the king's destiny to grow snakes, and he should stop trying to cut them off. Instead, Dr. Ahriman told him to appease the snakes. He should feed them nothing but human brains, and eventually they should die of the food. Meanwhile, back in Iran, Jamshid had continued to rule but without his shining far and the blessing of the god Ormazd. This was starting to lead to some rather strange decisions, and the result was growing rebellion against Jamshid's rule. Warlords were assembling armies to battle against each other. Every province of Jamshid's kingdom produced their own claimant to the throne. They all wanted to replace Jamshid, but no one agreed on who they should replace him with. One group of dissatisfied nobles made their way to Arabia. They heard the land was ruled by a terrifying king with a face like a serpent's. They thought that was exactly what Persia needed, a nice strong man to set things right. When they greeted Zahhak, they declared him their king, and asked him to go to Persia and set the crown of the world on his own head. Zahhak heard their pleas and assembled a large army of dissident Persians and Arabs. He invaded Jamshid's kingdom. When Jamshid realized there was no way he would be victorious, he abandoned his throne, his crown, his armies and wealth, and went into hiding. Jamshid disappeared for a full 100 years. Eventually, he was found living in the Far East. When Zahhak, now ruler of the world, found out, he went east, captured Jamshid, and executed the old king by sawing Jamshid in 2. Jamshid had lived for 700 years. With Ahriman's advice to guide him, Zahhak's rule over the world was a 1,000-year dark age. It was a backwards world. Virtue was shunned, black magic and sorcery celebrated. The just and wise went into hiding. The Deevs, Ahriman's demon followers, spread over the world and achieved their heart's desires. When Zahhak took over, he went into the palace left abandoned by Jamshid and dragged out Jamshid's 2 sisters, Arnavaz and Shahnameh. They trembled like trees in the presence of the new king, and were forced to enter his harem. Zahhak taught them sorcery and crimes, and corrupted Arnavaz and Shahnameh to his evil ways. Zahhak's reign was cruel. He abandoned the laws of past kings. If somebody had a beautiful daughter hidden away in his house, Zahhak accused the father of a crime. The girl would then be taken to act as his slave. To feed his snakes, every night 2 young men, either peasants or nobles, Zahhak didn't care, were brought to his palace. There the young men were killed, their heads smashed open, their brains scooped out, mashed, and fed to the snakes. It was truly a time of wickedness, but some good things were done in secret. 2 young men had an idea that they should go serve as cooks in Zahhak's kitchens. They thought that they would be able to save one of each pair killed to feed the snakes. So the 2 young men traveled from kitchen to kitchen, learning the art of cooking and how to prepare numerous tasty dishes until they were offered employment as cooks in Zahhak's palace. When Zahhak's 2 victims were dragged to the kitchen every night to be killed by the cooks, the 2 young men became sad and angry. They had to kill one of every pair, but they saved the other. With the human brains, they mixed sheep brains so no one would notice the smaller amount. They spirited the saved young men out of the palace. In this way, the 2 young cooks saved 30 men every month. According to the Shahnameh, the Kurds were descended from these survivors. After many centuries of darkness, late one night while he slept next to Arnavaz, Zahhak had a dream. But really for him it was a nightmare. In the dream, 3 warriors came to the palace. The youngest stood between them, and he was as tall as a cypress tree, and radiated with the holy fard nimbus that marked his right to rule. The warrior strode forward, pulled out an ox-headed mace, and smashed Zahhak on the head with it. The warrior flayed the king's skin from head to toe, bound his hands behind his back, and dragged him away. In his sleep, Zahhak let out a loud cry that shook the bedchamber. Arnavaz shook Zahhak awake and asked him what was wrong. She comforted him, saying the 7 climes, the world, were truly his, and demons watched over his life. Eventually, Zahhak was consoled and told Arnavaz about his dream. She reminded her husband that the whole world, with all its animals, men, and deeves, paid homage to him. She told him to gather astrologers and magicians and tell them about his dream. They would tell him what it meant. Following Arnavaz's guidance, Zahhak summoned sages and men of learning from all corners of the globe. He told them his dream and asked if it was an omen of good or evil. He asked them to tell him when his life would end and who would be king after him. He wanted them to reveal the mystery of the dream, and if they did not, he would kill them. When the sages heard the orders of the king, their mouths went dry, and they looked at each other with tears in their eyes. They kept quiet, and wondered what would happen if they told Zahhak the truth. The sages wondered for a while. 3 days passed, and Zahhak heard nothing. The king grew impatient, and on the 4th day told them that the time was up. They needed to tell him his fate, or he would hang them all. The sages fearfully bowed their heads in silence. Finally, one of them, Zahhak, boldly stepped forward. He told Zahhak that even if he surrounded himself with iron walls, he would not remain king forever. Another man was fated to take the throne. This man had not been born yet. His mother was not even pregnant, but his name would be Fereydun, and when he grew up he would be as tall as a cypress tree, carry an iron ox-headed mace, and drag Zahhak into the streets. Zahhak asked Zahhak why this man would come fight him. The sage replied that Zahhak would cause the death of Fereydun's father, and the young man would desire vengeance because of it. Hearing this, Zahhak fainted. Zahhak feared for his life, and the sages took advantage of Zahhak's unconsciousness to flee from the royal palace. When Zahhak woke up, he assembled his best and most loyal soldiers. He sent them out to search the world for signs of his coming enemy, but fear darkened Zahhak's days, and he did not eat or rest. Time passed, and the prophesied Fereydun was born. It was clear from the beginning he was destined for greatness. The holy far that once radiated from Jamshid now radiated from Fereydun. He had the blessing of the Creator or Mazd. Meanwhile, a cow, named Barmea, was born at the same time as Fereydun. This cow was the most amazing cow of all cows. Every hair on her body was a different color. After Fereydun was born, his father Abtin learned that Zahhak's soldiers were after him. He attempted to escape, but Zahhak's men caught Abtin in a trap, tied him up like a captured cheetah, and brought him to Zahhak. The king ordered Abtin's execution. Abtin's wife and Fereydun's mother was Faranak. When her husband never returned home and she heard what happened to him, she knew it was only a matter of time before Zahhak found her too. Faranak quickly packed up what she could carry and took Fereydun into the countryside, to the meadow where the cow Barmea was kept. Faranak went to the owner of the cow and asked him to take her baby, act as his parents, and feed him with the milk of the colorful cow. The owner of the cow accepted, and raised Fereydun as his own son for 3 years. But at that point, rumors of the fantastic cow reached Zahhak. Faranak learned her son was in danger and returned to the meadow. She took her son back, thanked the man, and said she would take the boy far away to the Alborz mountains to raise. It was not a moment too soon. Days later, Zahhak reached the meadow. He killed the cow Barmea and every animal he saw nearby. He then went to the farmhouse, found it abandoned, and burnt it to the ground. Meanwhile, Faranak took Fereydun to the Alborz mountains and found a hermit cut off from the rest of the world. She told the hermit about how Fereydun was fated to kill Zahhak and take the throne. She asked him to protect the boy and act like his father until he was a young man. The hermit accepted and took Fereydun to his lair high in the mountains. Now, why did Fereydun keep giving her son up? And where did she go while he was being raised by strangers? Well, she actually had 2 other sons, and while it's never mentioned, let's assume she went back to wherever they were to raise them to adulthood too. Years passed, and when Fereydun was 16, he descended the mountain and found his mother. He asked her to share the secrets of his life and tell him about his father and family. Fereydun replied that Fereydun was Iranian. His father was a man named Abtine and descended from the kings. He was a wise man and warrior. Fereydun told Fereydun that his father had sacrificed himself to save the boy from Zahhak, and how Fereydun was raised and fed milk from the wonderful cow Barmea. She told him Zahhak killed his father and the cow. Hearing the story chilled Fereydun's heart and put him into a rage. He longed for vengeance and declared he would grab a sword and raise the dust of battle over Zahhak's palace. Fereydun sternly told him he was being a foolish child. She told him he had no followers, while Zahhak ruled the entire world and could summon an army of 100,000 warriors from every country with a single word. Revenge would come, but would require time and careful preparation. Back at Zahhak's palace, the existence of Fereydun and the inability of the army to destroy him put the evil tyrant into a terrible state of mind. Once again, he summoned sages and wise men from across the land. When they gathered in his throne room, Zahhak admitted he had a secret enemy. He told them of his plans to grow the size of the army and fill it with both men and Deves. To further bind the people to him, Zahhak instructed the sages to sign a written document he had prepared. The document said Zahhak acted with righteousness, said only what was true, and was zealous in the pursuit of justice. It was a bundle of lies, but the sages feared Zahhak's retaliation if they did not agree to sign it. While they lined up to sign the document, a loud commotion broke out outside, and soon a man came into the hall demanding justice. Zahhak looked down from his throne and frowned. He asked the man why he had come, and who did he accuse of injustice. The man introduced himself as Kaveh, and said he was a blacksmith. He clenched his fists and told Zahhak it was the king he accused of injustice. He said, "Your fires have destroyed all I have done. If you reign over the 7 lands, why do the people suffer? Why was my son taken and his brains fed to your snake's insatiable greed?" Zahhak had never been so boldly accused before, and immediately tried to appease Kaveh with honeyed words. Kaveh's son had not actually been killed yet, so Zahhak ordered he be brought out and returned to the blacksmith. Zahhak saw that Kaveh could be a man of influence, and ordered him to sign the same document as the sages in exchange for releasing his son. Kaveh pushed his way to the front of the line and read the document. When he was finished, he turned to the sages. "You are all in Ahriman's grasp now," he said. "I will never follow this corrupt tyrant and his evil court." And with that, Kaveh grabbed the document, ripped it to shreds, and threw it at Zahhak's feet. Kaveh and his son then walked out of the palace, to the shocked surprise of everyone inside, and with Zahhak silently watching. As they left, a sage turned to Zahhak and asked the king why he hadn't reacted to the man's insolence. Zahhak admitted to the sage that as soon as Kaveh arrived, he was completely overwhelmed, as if an impenetrable mountain stood between them. What's going on here? Well, this may be due to the magical properties often given to iron in folklore and legends around the world. In many places, it's believed to ward away evil. Since Kaveh was a blacksmith and worked with iron all the time, maybe he had some of that iron power all over him, and this protected him from the evil tyrant. Regardless, Kaveh was not stopped when he left the palace. Out in the street, a large crowd gathered around him as he shouted his demands for justice. He took his leather blacksmith's apron and tied it to the tip of a long spear. More people rallied to this improvised flag, and Kaveh told them that they should join Fereydun to free themselves from Zahhak's chains. Kaveh led the people to Fereydun's camp. When Fereydun saw the leather apron flag, he had it draped with jewels, gold, and fringes of colored fabric. Forever afterwards, new kings of Iran would do the same, and add more jewels to it as time went by. Now, how does Kaveh know the location of Fereydun? It's not clear, and Kaveh does not appear again in the Shahnameh, although his other surviving sons play a role. However, another Iranian epic, the Shahnameh, says Kaveh served as one of Fereydun's generals, so let's assume that Kaveh knew where Fereydun was because he already had some link to the rebellion. He may have even led his own rebellion. In the Tariq al-Tabari, a 10th century historical chronicle by medieval Muslim historian Muhammad al-Tabari, there's more details on Kaveh. It says he was a farmer whose sons were fed to Zahhak snakes. Fed up, he and his supporters took over the city of Isfahan in western Persia. Zahhak sent an army to recapture the city, but Kaveh's forces defeated it. The men there wanted to crown Kaveh king, but he refused, saying it was not his goal to take over the land, but to free the people from Zahhak's tyranny. He told them to find someone of royal blood they could crown instead. Ultimately, they ended up supporting Fereydun, who was descended from Jamshid. Other Persian and Arabic sources agree with this. Kaveh's profession in these sources changes. He is often a blacksmith or farmer, but in one he is a shoemaker. Sometimes his flag is not made from a blacksmith's apron, but is instead made from an animal skin. The number of Kaveh's sons also varies. Sometimes he has 12, sometimes 7, and sometimes 18. Usually all but one is killed for their brains. But in the Shahnameh, 2 sons, Garan and Gobad, also become important warriors serving under Fereydun. Anyway, back to the Shahnameh. With Kaveh's support, the rebellion's forces grew, and Fereydun saw that Zahhak's days were numbered. He prepared his army for battle, but kept his plans secret. One day, Fereydun asked his 2 brothers to go into the market and bring back the best blacksmiths they could find. When they returned, Fereydun sat down in front of them and drew a picture of an ox-headed mace in the dust at their feet. "Build this," he told the blacksmiths, "and be rewarded." When they were done, Fereydun held the mace. He told them, "If I can lay Zahhak beneath the earth with this, I shall guide the world toward justice." In many oral versions of this story, it is Kaveh again, and not a group of nameless blacksmiths, who created the mace, and it was also enchanted in some way. Anyway, with Fereydun now wielding a formidable weapon, the army finally set out. On their march, they came to a place where a number of religious devotees lived. Fereydun sent greetings to them, and a man came forward to welcome him. The man had a face like a beautiful woman, and hair that came down to his feet. Fereydun guessed that this holy man was not human, and was instead a divine being. He taught Fereydun magic, and after a nice meal together, Fereydun fell asleep. Fereydun's brothers were jealous of their younger brother, and decided to kill him. While Fereydun slept, they climbed a tall hill. They pushed a large boulder tumbling down the hillside in the direction of their sleeping brother. But the Creator's will would not be stopped. The sound of rocks falling woke up Fereydun, and he looked up to see the boulder coming his way. He used the spells taught to him by the holy man to stop the rock in its tracks. Afterwards, Fereydun woke up the army and resumed their march. He never said anything to his brothers about what had happened. Fereydun's army arrived at the Tigris River and made camp near the city of Baghdad. A ferryman was asked to carry the army across, but the man declined. He didn't have any boats, and Zahhak had ordered him to not let so much as a mosquito cross the river unless it was with a permit written with a secret sign. Angry, and without the ferryman's help, Fereydun ordered his men to mount their horses and have them carry them into the water. In this way, they got across the river and continued on to Jerusalem, where Zahhak had made his capital. When they saw the king of the world's palace with its walls that shined like the stars, Fereydun's heart fell. He feared that the king might somehow be secretly favored by fate. But instead of backing down, Fereydun pledged to attack immediately, while they still had the element of surprise. Fereydun pulled out his ox-headed mace and charged the army forward. When he entered Zahhak's palace, he found himself in front of a large idol. It honored a deity that was not the creator, so Fereydun knocked it down. He went through the palace, crushing the heads of the magicians and Deves who lived there, before arriving at Zahhak's great hall. The palace was secured. Fereydun ordered Zahhak's concubines be brought to him. Arnavaz and Shahnameh cowered at his feet. They feared for their lives, but Fereydun ordered their minds be purified. He taught the sisters of Jamshid the ways of righteousness, and they told him they had wretchedly passed their days suffering at Zahhak's hands, only cooperating with Zahhak because they feared for their lives. Arnavaz asked Fereydun what he thought it would be like to be married to a serpent. Finally, they told him Zahhak was not even there. The king had gone to India and was busy slaughtering innocent men and women so he could bathe in their blood and appease his snakes. The tyrant had left a man in charge in his absence. When this man, Khondro, walked into the hall and saw Fereydun sitting on the throne with Jamshid's sisters standing next to him, he slyly paused. He bowed before Fereydun and declared his allegiance. He organized a large feast for Fereydun, with music, wine, and dancing. The festivities went late into the night, but by the morning Khondro had saddled a horse and left the palace to warn Zahhak. When Khondro arrived in India, he told Zahhak how 3 brothers led an army into the palace. One carried an ox-headed mace, took the throne, and flung men and demons loyal to Zahhak off the wall. While the Shahnameh doesn't say this, let's imagine that Khondro found Zahhak lying quietly in his bloodbath of innocence, surrounded by candles, his snakes lulled to sleep with an ambient background music. Zahhak must have been very relaxed, because he was weirdly unfazed by Khondro's news. He told Khondro Fereydun was a guest, and that there was nothing wrong. Khondro replied, "Since when does a guest use a mace to destroy your sacred idols and convert your people to their own faith?" But again, Zahhak remained unbothered, putting all his attention on his yellow rubber ducky. He said Fereydun was a very demanding guest, and very demanding guests were actually good luck. Khondro tried one more time. "Since when does a guest go into your harem?" This man strokes Shahnameh's cheeks with one hand, while Arnavaz kisses the other, and at night he sleeps pillowed between both of these women. When Zahhak heard this, his relaxation finally broke. He fell out of the tub and onto the ground. He cursed his fate, and told Khondro he would never guard one of his castles again, to which Khondro replied, "My lord, if you don't act in your defense, I don't think you will ever see your throne or any of your castles again." Zahhak gathered an army of Deves. They went to Jerusalem and surrounded the city. To Zahhak's surprise, the people of Jerusalem joined Fereydun's army. The streets filled with swords, arrows, and dead bodies, but Zahhak's army was held off. So the evil king tried something else. He dressed himself from head to toe in iron armor, so he was unrecognizable, climbed the walls, and crawled over the roof of the palace alone. Not a smart idea. He came to a courtyard. Down below, he saw bright-cheeked Shahnameh sitting with Fereydun. He overheard them cursing the king, him. Angry and jealous, he pulled out his dagger, ready to stab his traitorous concubine. Zahhak held the dagger in his teeth and descended the walls. But when his feet touched the ground, he found Fereydun ready for him. The hero quickly came forward, swung his ox-headed mace, and brought it down right on top of Zahhak's head. The king's iron helmet shattered. He fell to the ground in a daze. But before Fereydun could deliver the killing blow, the divine messenger of the creator Ormazd, the angelic Sorush, appeared. He ordered Fereydun to stop and not strike the monstrous tyrant again. Instead, Zahhak should be bound and imprisoned on Mount Damavand until the end of time. Fereydun obeyed. While Zahhak was still unconscious, he gathered long strips of lion skin and bound Zahhak's arms and legs. Zahhak was flung on the back of a donkey and taken to the mountains. But when Fereydun reached his destination, he remembered how Zahhak had killed his father, killed the cow Barmaya, and filled the land with Deves and human suffering. Fereydun filled with rage. He looked at Zahhak's snakes and wondered how such a monster could be left alive. He lifted his mace to kill Zahhak, but again Sorush appeared and stopped him. He told Fereydun that Zahhak could not be killed. If he died, all the vileness and evil that was inside of him would leave his body and seep into the world. Instead, Sorush led Fereydun to a mountain cave. Zahhak was tied with heavy chains. Long nails were pounded through his body, but not through his corruption-filled organs, and into the rocks of the mountain. Zahhak would suffer, imprisoned, until the end of the world. Finally, Fereydun left Mount Damavand, took over Zahhak's throne, and overturned the tyrant's evil laws. After 1,000 years of darkness, truth, righteousness, and justice returned to the world. At the beginning of this episode, when we first heard about the Shahnameh's Zahhak, he was a human prince. He wasn't a particularly good person. He was open to listening to Ahriman, but he was human nonetheless. When he grows the snakes on his shoulders, we get hints, though, of something else. The nobles who recruited him to be king of Persia describe Zahhak as having a face like a serpent's, and his captive concubines describe him as a monster too. Then there is his army of Deevs, something that a typical human warlord would not have. In the Zoroastrian Avesta, the earlier version of the name Zahhak is Az-Daha or Azi-Dahaka. The word Azi actually means serpent or dragon, so right away we understand our villain is a monster. He is described as having 3 heads that contain 3 mouths and 6 eyes in total. But it's not clear if Azi-Dahaka is a human who can take on a monstrous dragon shape, or a dragon who can take on the shape of a human. He's a little different from the other dragons mentioned in early Zoroastrian texts. Serpent monsters are fairly common in Persian mythology. They have ravenous appetites and consume men and horses. Sometimes they live in rivers, are said to spit poison or breathe in with enough force to suck in unsuspecting warriors. They also, in some cases, might be able to do magic. In most Persian myths, they are basically rampaging wild animals until they get killed by a superhuman hero. In the Avesta, Az-Daha is more human-like and is linked to the earlier versions of the same characters the later Zahhak battles against. In the Shahnameh, Zahhak deposed Jamshid from the Persian throne and eventually sawed him in half. Separate stories of Persian folklore add more details. They have Zahhak try and kill Jamshid with a sword, but Jamshid is invulnerable and can't be hurt. But Zahhak listens to his old advisor Ahriman. The evil spirit tells him that Jamshid can only be killed by sawing him from below, so Zahhak cuts Jamshid from groin to forehead and kills him. In the Avesta, Az-Dahaka does not kill the hero Yima, the earlier version of Jamshid. Instead, Yima is killed by another person, an entity called Spituria, or Spitter, likely with help from Az-Dahaka. Over time, this extra person was dropped or merged with Az-Dahaka, until by the time of the Shahnameh, it is Zahhak only who kills Jamshid. In the Shahnameh, the core part of the Zahhak story is his rise to power, the dark age he rules over, and then his eventual defeat by the forces of good led by Fereydun. In the earlier Zoroastrian literature, we find earlier echoes of this too. The Bundahishni claims Az-Dahaka is an actual descendant of Ahriman, and did not just receive advice from the evil spirit. In the Avesta, after the death of Yima, Az-Dahaka prays and completes sacrifices to 2 gods, the goddess Anahit and the wind god Veu. He asks them to grant him the power to empty the whole world of people. This is the oldest piece of the story, but you can see how that may have inspired the later Zahhak's terrible, oppressive reign and the regular killing of people to feed his snakes. The Avesta also introduces the hero Fereydun, who it calls Oriteona. He is helped by the gods, similar to Fereydun, and saves 2 women named Sengavachi and Arnavachi from Az-Dahaka. These 2 women are earlier versions of Jamshid's sisters Sharnavaz and Arnavaz. The Avestan Oriteona also asks the gods to grant him the power to defeat Az-Dahaka. However, we have to look to the later Denkard, a Zoroastrian text written in the 10th century, to understand how the earlier Zoroastrians thought Oriteona was victorious. It says the hero smacked Az-Dahaka on the shoulder, heart, and skull with his club, but didn't kill the monster because Ormazd warned him this would release more dangerous creatures, just like in the later Shahnameh. So, like in the Shahnameh, Az-Dahaka was imprisoned instead of being killed. But in the Zoroastrian works, we are told that at the end of the world, he will break free from his chains and devour 1/3 of all humans, oxen, and sheep before being killed by a reborn hero. So that's the story of Zahhak. This episode covered Ahriman's corruption of the young prince and his rise to become a monstrous evil tyrant who ruled over the entire world. Zahhak's story was tied into the story of Jamshid from last episode, as a weakened, blessingless Jamshid was easy pickings for Zahhak to depose. Zahhak himself was later overthrown by another Persian hero named Fereydun. My comparisons with the ancient Avesta and Zoroastrian literature shows that a lot of the elements of these stories were conserved across the millennia, but there were obviously additional details added over time as well. This season, I am relying on the Shahnameh as my main source of Persian mythology. Up to now, I have covered a series of legendary, civilization-founding kings, and their efforts at fighting against the evil spirit Ahriman and his hordes of demonic followers. Zahhak, with his serpent-sprouting shoulders and magic powers, proved to be the most potent of these evil threats. But with Zahhak's defeat, the overt demonic opposition to the Persian kings will now slowly fade into the background. The Shahnameh will now enter a phase where most of the conflict comes from frictions between rival human factions. So stay tuned, and thank you for listening.